Welcome, everyone. We are admitting folks and getting ready to start at the top of the hour. And Lauren and Elizabeth, while we're waiting, I just want to let you know that in addition to whoever attends live today, we're going to be circulating it to the whole group of judges, and that if you guys want to report on how many people watched it online or anything like that, we can provide you those numbers as well. So welcome everyone. It's the top of the hour. I'm going to start on time because we have a very packed presentation and I want to have the most possible time for our colleagues from HHS who are going to be presenting today and Judge Hemstreet. So I'm Leslie Orloff. I run the National Immigrant Women's Advocacy Project at American University and have the privilege of convening the National Judicial Network. This is our peer-to-peer forum today. We're going to be talking about the HHS offices, the Office on Trafficking in Persons, and we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions and get answers about how they identifying and reporting and the help available to child trafficking victims. Next slide, please. To date, we have 115, the National Judicial Network members are growing. We're at 115 from 34 states. And so we encourage you to keep advertising the future trainings to your colleagues. So really appreciate that. Next slide, please. And also a reminder that, to please feel free if you have questions or thoughts or comments or further questions regarding this training or any others, you can use the listserv that we have that's members only. Next slide, please. And that, just to put it on your calendars and save the date, we have the next session will be joined by United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. It'll be a session facilitated by Judge Gonzalez. And they're going to be talking about how not only the Hague Convention on Adoptions, but basically how state court adoptions need to be done in a way so that the children before you don't end up without a path to legal immigration status in the United States. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in the next session. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Judge Hemstreet.
Thank you, Leslie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Judge Melissa Hemstreet from Kitsap County Superior Court in Washington State. And as Leslie indicated, today we're going to be hearing from the Office on Trafficking in Persons. And today we have with us Elizabeth Mataro, a child welfare and protection specialist, and Lauren Devine, the child trafficking protection and prevention coordinator. As Leslie kind of indicated, we're going to learn today how this office can assist those that appear in front of us that we suspect are being trafficked, either for labor trafficking or sexual exploitation. They derive much of their authority from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and they are a significant resource to the youth that appear in front of us that qualify for their assistance. Quite honestly, Leslie is the one that got me connected with them, and I got to sit down and talk with them, and I was really shocked by how much they can help the youth that appear in front of us. We don't even have to be able to confirm necessarily that they are not a U.S. citizen, because that's a question that in Washington State we're not probably going to ask. But we can still get them the assistance and the help that they need. I think we've all seen youth in our courtrooms that we've been concerned about, that we've wondered if they are U.S. citizens and how they got here, and have wondered if they've been trafficked. Well, this is the resource that can help them. So Leslie wasn't kidding. This is a jam-packed presentation today. So without further ado or delay, I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth and Lauren.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's so wonderful. So honored to be in this space with you all. We are grateful to join you, and we see a couple of familiar, I was going to say faces, but I'll also say names on today. And so just grateful for the work that you do and the partnership in this work. Like Judge Hemstreet mentioned, my name is Lauren Devine, and I'm the Child Trafficking Prevention and Protection Coordinator at OTIP, and I'm here with my colleague Elizabeth Mataro, and we are here to talk about benefits and services and the reporting requirements for responding to concerns of trafficking among foreign national minors. So before we click through any slides, the biggest thing that I want to lay out is, before we get going and give context to, is that there is a 24-hour reporting requirement for federal, state, and local officials under the TVPA of 2000 as amended in 22 U.S. Code 7105. It basically says that if any federal, state, or local official has concerns that a foreign national minor may have experienced trafficking, they shall report that to HHS or OTIP within 24 hours so that that child can receive benefits and services. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I also want to flag, and I'll say this a few times, that the trafficking does not have to have any nexus to the United States to be submitted to us. So it could have occurred in home country 10 years ago. So long as we get that case before the child's 18th birthday and they're here in the US, we can process it and connect them to benefits and services. So that's the main thing I wanted to touch base on before we got going. But with that, we will get started. So just to briefly introduce our office, the Office on Trafficking in Persons is located within the Administration for Children and Families at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Our acronym is OTIP, OTIP. And if you're familiar with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, we're in the same Administration for Children and Families. But we are a separate office. We're a pretty small office, and we started in June of 2015. To address trafficking from a public health framework. So looking at how do we prevent trafficking from occurring in the first place, and then should it occur, what are services that should be put in place to help individuals rebuild their lives and become self-sufficient. So our office is broken into three major functions: prevention, protection, and research and policy. And today we're specifically focusing on our protection division function. So this is our child eligibility process, which we'll be talking about, as well as some of our grant programming for foreign national minors. But some other things that our office does support is our National Human Trafficking Hotline, our child victim coordination activities, both our child eligibility and adult certification programs, and our grant programs. And then in our prevention division, we have our training and technical assistance, engagement with individuals of lived experience, our public awareness campaign, Look Beneath the Surface, our regional coordination, and then our prevention education grant programming. And then under research and policy, we have all of our kind of self-explanatory, our research and policy, as well as our data programming. All right, next slide. So you all are very much experts on the definition of human trafficking, but we wanted to briefly just highlight how we are mandated to review cases and how we look at cases and what types of cases we should receive. So basically, if you have concerns that the child has experienced a severe form of trafficking in persons, so forced labor or commercial sex, or there's a scheme for forced labor or commercial sex, or even just red flags or indicators of forced labor or commercial sex, at any point in the child's life, any location, we would recommend you submitting what's called a request for assistance to our office. So this next section, we're going to talk through those definitions and common trends on these cases. Elizabeth is going to put in the chat box a link to this little 3-minute video that talks through the child eligibility process if you're interested, but because of time, we won't show it now. And then we will also pass along some resources. So of course, you know what human trafficking is, but for our process, what we say is for labor trafficking, it doesn't have to have actually occurred. If we have indication that a child was brought here for the purpose of forced labor, that they previously, someone attempted to recruit them, harbor them, transport them, provide them for the purpose of forced labor, and then the same for sex trafficking. If there's information to indicate that a child was solicited, asked, or offered to have sex in exchange for something of value, provided to an individual in exchange for something of value to have sex, where there's any indicators of potential sex trafficking or labor trafficking for a foreign national minor, we can get that case to review to connect that child to benefits and services. Next slide. Again, if there's information that you know that the child was smuggled to the United States, and if they had gone to live with a certain person, or there was an individual that they came to live with, that there was information that they would have forced the child to work, or likely would have subjected the child to engage in sex acts in exchange for something of value or some type of sexual servitude, we can absolutely take that case to connect them to services. Next slide. In regards to trafficking versus ransom, we do see quite a bit of ransom cases. Of course, ransom in and of itself would not be human trafficking. However, if while the child is held for ransom, or there's information to indicate that in addition to the ransom that the child experienced or the extortion that they experienced, they were made to do chores or perform some type of labor or service, or they were told, if you have sex with me, you can be released and your ransom will be paid for. Any of those indicators, we absolutely want to get that case because we, again, can issue a letter to that child. Also, labor exploitation versus trafficking. We do get quite a few of labor trafficking cases. And so really, when in doubt, send the case our way. Even if you have some indicators, maybe the child, there's information that the child is working in the middle of the night, not being paid what they were promised, having their pay withheld, they're working in unsafe conditions, they're unclear if their debt is going down or there's some kind of concerns, please send that case. Obviously, what would bring that into a case of trafficking is if there is a high debt that won't go down, there is, some type of force, fraud, or coercion related to the work, they're demoralized, they're, threatened with deportation, etc. That would be very clear labor trafficking. But we'll get into this in a bit, but we can issue what's called interim assistance, giving that child benefits and services for up to 120 days when there's indication of potential trafficking. So even if you have an exploitation case, you're not quite sure if the child that you're working with or is in court has experienced labor trafficking, we would just say when in doubt or when not sure, send that case our way. We can connect the child to services, case management services, as well as benefits to try to figure out what may be going on in the case. Next slide. So again, we are looking at severe form of trafficking in persons under 22 U.S. Code 7102. You all are very familiar with the AMP model. And again, we don't need to show that the actual labor or service occurred. We just need to show that there was an action, means, and purpose. The child was in the midst of a scheme. There was some type of plan, or that the child fled in to avoid the labor or service and the forced servitude. But you all are very familiar with these definitions, so we won't spend too much time here. And then for sex trafficking, because of the passing of the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, we added, of course, that added the actions of soliciting and patronizing to the definition for sex trafficking. Obviously, because we're talking about minors today, there's no means. So if we have information that the child was offered money, food, shelter, etc., in exchange for engaging in a sex act, even if the child does not engage, refuses, walks away, there's some type of intervention that occurs. Even if the solicitation alone occurs, we can say that that child was solicited for the purpose of a commercial sex act and connect them to services. And then, of course, patronizing. In terms of sex trafficking for our cases, obviously there's something of value. It doesn't have to just be money. It can be food, shelter, gifts, transportation, anything commercial in nature. When we're looking at sexual act, to review these cases, we're looking at 18 U.S. Code 2246. So that's oral, anal, vaginal sex, digital penetration, or touching underneath the clothing in the genital region. Again, when in doubt, we're not sure what type of sex act occurred or the details of the case. That's absolutely fine. We can still, of course, issue interim assistance, or in some situations, if it seems benefit of the doubt that there was that sex act in exchange for something of value, we can absolutely issue services. And then child sexual abuse material, if we have information that the photos or videos are being distributed for something of value, and in the photos or videos, the child is engaging in a sex act, we can absolutely connect them and issue an eligibility letter. We've also seen cases of labor trafficking in relation to child sexual abuse material. And then finally, like I mentioned before, because of the JVTA, the solicitation alone is sufficient for us to issue letters. Next slide. We will pass these slides around. These just kind of talk through how we look at these different actions. And then the next slide talks through how we determine if the means occurred, and then finally the purposes. Really for us though, we are the receivers of the information. We are not for us disclosure, and Elizabeth will be touching on this a bit. Disclosure is not the goal. We don't need all of these details. We're just trying to parse out the information received, the information that that an individual has. Does that indicate that the child experienced trafficking? And these are just some ways to kind of help break down how we may view those cases. Next slide. So in terms of cases, while this is for all foreign national minors, so non-lawful permanent residents, non-US citizens under the age of 18, a lot of our cases are on behalf of unaccompanied children. And so some common case trends that we see are commercial sex and smuggling. So we see a lot of cases where children are solicited to engage in sex acts in exchange for the cost of their journey, shelter, immigration documents, food. We see a lot of domestic and sexual servitude cases where children are held and forced to engage in sex acts or perform household duties. We do see quite a few forced criminality cases. So children are forced to work or perform services for gangs or cartels with threat of harm for noncompliance. So what may present as a child that is a quote gang member may actually indicate that they are a victim of trafficking. And so really looking at cases that may the child is performing those criminal acts, we do see quite a bit of labor trafficking in the form of forced criminality. We also see a lot of forced labor and smuggling cases where child is forced to work in relation to a smuggling situation. We see a lot of forced labor situations by caregiver. So the caregiver is forcing the child to work, pay off a debt that goes beyond a normal work type situation in the context of a family. And we do see a lot of forced labor on journey. So during the journey, the child may be kidnapped, held for ransom or extortion, or forced to work or perform some type of service. So these are just some common trends that we see in relation to the cases we receive. And Elizabeth will talk about this in a bit, but last year we received over 3,000 requests for assistance on behalf of foreign national minors. The year before, over 2,000. So we do see quite a bit of cases, and we're continuing to see these numbers. And so just thought it would be helpful to kind of talk through some of these trends and just generally what we see on these types of cases. Next slide. Okay, great. So with that, I will pass it to Elizabeth to break down more about the actual child eligibility process. And I think we might actually be hearing from Judge Hemstreet in between that. So I'll pass it first to you, Judge Hemstreet.
Thank you, Lauren. I just wanted to kind of get us focused on how we might see these cases come in front of us. In Washington State, Superior Court is a court of general jurisdiction. So I never know exactly what I'm going to do. My court is a smaller court, so we don't have necessarily specific rotations that we're always on. So I do something different every day. I was recently on what we call our ex parte calendar and had a request for minor guardianship come up in front of me. And it was right after I got to talk with Elizabeth and Lauren. And I had a new pro bono attorney trying to help someone through a minor guardianship matter, trying to also help a youth with whether or not they were going to be deported. And they had come up from Mexico after mom could no longer help and dad didn't want the youth anymore. As part of the recitation to the court, I did hear about some of these trends. Unfortunately, on his journey up to Washington State, being forced to do some labor in order to get his journey completed here, wasn't paid for that labor. There was some thoughts by the attorney that there may have been more than just labor, that there might have been some sexual exploitation as well, which is, we all know, is not uncommon in males, especially in the age of 15 or 16, which is how old this youth was. So we see it come in front of us, not just on the criminal calendar, but in other ways. And now we have the ability to reach out to an agency and make a report, even if we can't confirm it. I think most of us have done criminal court. I also do a girls' court in Washington State. So I work with a lot of youth that I suspect have been trafficked, but we all are aware they're not likely to come out and say that they've been trafficked because they don't necessarily think like that, right? I mean, they're getting these really great things, these cool purses and clothing and all of this stuff. But we know that they're paying a price that they don't quite realize. If we suspect then that they are not a United States citizen, we now have a resource to hand them over to. And I don't want to take up too much time. I just want us to be thinking about how we see these cases as they come in front of us, because I do think they come in front of us more frequently than we realize. And Elizabeth will tell us how we can get the youth help that come in front of us. Thank you, Elizabeth.
I'd like to just jump in with one point of clarification, maybe from Lauren, just clarification or reiteration. Because what I think is really interesting here is, so my question really is, so you're saying that the judge doesn't have to find that this person's been trafficked, that if they suspect it, or if there even is, if they see evidence of a scheme, or, so can you explain just one more time about, you said something, scheme, fleeing to avoid, you know, what are those different other kinds of things short of the trafficking itself that could have happened that would be sufficient?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we would say it's really not on you. So there doesn't have to be an investigation. There doesn't have to be a confirmed law enforcement involvement. It's really a report. They could have said, you know, 10 years ago in Honduras, a gang forced me to sell drugs for them and threatened to kill me if I didn't do that. Even though here in Washington, you wouldn't necessarily be able to, you know, do something specifically on that in terms of, like, you know, law enforcement wouldn't necessarily be able to do a case. That would still be a case where that child would be eligible for refugee benefits and be able to be connected to a case manager. In terms of scheme, plan, or pattern, let's say you had a case where you know that a child was recruited by someone on TikTok to come to the US, to come live with them, engage in sex acts. They would pay for their journey. But then someone intervened and said, no, you cannot go live with this person. And so you have that in your docket, you have that information that was going to happen. Even if the child didn't go live with that person, in that scenario, we have enough to show that that child was brought to the United States, transported for the purpose of engaging in sex acts in exchange for something of value, the cost of the journey. And we can issue a letter saying that child is and was in the midst of a scheme for trafficking. So what we tell people is, if you just have gut concerns, red flags, may be a victim, send that case our way and we can at least issue interim assistance, which Elizabeth will talk in a bit. Does that help, Leslie?
Yeah,
clarify?
that's exactly
Okay,
right.
perfect.
Thank you.
Of course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lauren, for that first half of the presentation. Thank you, Judge Hemstreet and Leslie. So I will be going through a little bit more detail about kind of how to request assistance. So Lauren talked a lot about what we look for in those cases once they come to our office. I'll talk a little bit more about what that process looks like. And then once those letters are issued, kind of how advocates working directly with the children can help them access benefits. So as Lauren mentioned, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 as amended requires all federal, state, and local officials to report potential trafficking concerns on behalf of foreign national minors to HHS within 24 hours. So anyone can submit a request for assistance. That 24-hour requirement is in there specifically for state, federal, and local officials. But really anyone working on behalf of this child can submit the case if it's a case manager or someone else that's working with them closely, an attorney, an advocate of some kind, anyone can submit a case to our office. And upon receipt of credible information that a foreign national minor has experienced human trafficking, OTIP issues what's called an eligibility letter to the child. And that letter over here is pictured. So the eligibility letter never expires, and we'll talk a little bit more about how it's used, but this letter is something that a child can use, making them eligible to apply for benefits and services to the same extent as a refugee. This is very helpful for foreign national minors because they wouldn't otherwise be able to access these benefits in many cases, including, we'll get more into what they are, but refugee cash assistance, food stamps. For adults, which we're not really going to talk about adults today, but for adults to access these same benefits, it requires them to be pursuing a T visa. Eligibility letters are not tied to legal status at all, and there's no requirement to pursue a T visa. So as long as the case is submitted prior to a child's 18th birthday, Lauren clarified in the chat that if you miss that 24-hour window, we'll still accept the case. We really want to receive any case that you have for a child under the age of 18. But there is a deadline to submit the case up until their 18th birthday. Once they turn 18, we're no longer able to accept that case. And as Lauren mentioned, the trafficking can have occurred at any point in their life. So in home country, on their journey, when they were very young or very recently, and it's not tied to any kind of criminal case or investigation. So this sort of breaks down a little bit more about what the process looks like. An individual has concerns that a foreign national minor may have experienced forced labor or commercial sex at any point in their life. That individual then goes ahead and submits that request for assistance on the minor's behalf. And the system to submit the request for assistance for OTIP is called Shepherd. It's an online case management system. It's pretty straightforward, and I'll kind of walk you through what it looks like in a minute. But Shepherd is the best place to submit those requests for assistance online. It's confidential, it's secure, and our office uses that system to process the cases. We have a child protection team, and we review the case, correspond with the requester. So if we need additional information, we'll follow up. That doesn't always mean that the requester necessarily needs to go back and ask the child all of those questions. It's really an information gathering process. We don't want to re-traumatize children at all in the process of providing this information, but any documentation you might have or any further information, anything that the child might have disclosed that's helpful in understanding those pieces that Laura was describing before around the A&P model is really helpful for us when we're reviewing cases. And then we'll make that assessment internally. We'll kind of look through all of those criteria. We'll determine whether what they've experienced is in accordance with that federal definition. And if OTIP determines that the minor experienced trafficking, an eligibility letter would be issued, and the child would be referred to receive case management services. That said, if there are still those concerns that are a bit more vague, and we'll get more into those types of determinations we issue in just a second, we can still refer children to case management services. We can still issue a temporary, what's known as an interim assistance letter, and we'll make sure that we're coordinating with the requester to assess for any further needs to try and get that minor assistance. So the determination types, as mentioned, we have the eligibility letter. So if the information presented provides a clear explanation that the A&P model have been met, action means purpose are clearly in line, or action and purpose for the for sex trafficking, that a child clearly has experienced forced labor or commercial sex, the child will be issued an eligibility letter. Our team will coordinate to ensure that that's sent to the best location, whether that be the advocate that's working directly with the child or to the child's home. We want to make sure that's going to a safe place. And that letter never expires. So if all that information is clear, eligibility can be issued very quickly. If there are urgent needs for support, we can make that happen quickly. You can just reach out to us and we'll request that it be expedited. In cases where an investigation might be ongoing, there might be concerns of a scheme, there might be information that still needs to be gathered, that's when we would issue an interim assistance letter. The interim assistance letter allows a child to access benefits for up to 120 days while OTIP continues to gather that information. So let's say the person working with the child needs to ask some more follow-up questions. The child might be experiencing some trauma symptoms. They have some general information, but there's not the full picture yet. That's when we just want to make sure they get that letter so they can go ahead and apply for benefits in the short term, and ensure that they're connected to support right away. If we receive the case and it's very clear that this is something like a ransom case that doesn't involve forced labor or commercial sex, or a smuggling case that also doesn't involve forced labor or commercial sex, we might issue a denial, but we always want to make sure that any requester knows that they can resubmit a case if new information comes to light that a minor may be a victim of trafficking in the future. And it's really just based on the information that we have that this does not meet the criteria in order to issue another letter. However, if at any time someone that's submitting a case wants to staff that case with us, talk that through, provide more information up until the child's 18th birthday, that can be provided. So we don't issue denials lightly, and we want to make sure that we gather all the information possible. These are sort of going back through the reporting requirements again. I think we covered that pretty well, but we also just want to make sure, of course, that it's reported in accordance with child welfare laws as well. And this is kind of an overview of what our Shepherd system looks like. So this is where that request for assistance is submitted. So again, anyone can submit a case to our office that's working on behalf of a child. Shepherd requires you to just go in, create an account, and then submit through a confidential, secure system. It can also be used to request certification letters for adults. Again, we're not really talking about the adult process, but if you encounter a foreign national adult that is pursuing a T visa, has a T visa or continued presence, and is in need of a certification letter, we also use Shepherd for that purpose. Now, the benefits that a child can receive with an eligibility letter do vary state by state, but essentially the letter provides the child with eligibility to apply for those benefits. So the child will still need to meet all of the criteria in that state, including income threshold and other state-specific eligibility requirements. However, because of this letter, they are eligible to the same extent as a refugee to access any of these services. So refugee cash assistance and refugee medical assistance are really the two time-limited benefits, and we want to make sure that a child is able to begin receiving those quickly. So those are limited to 12 months from the date that the letter is issued. Otherwise, children with eligibility letters are able to access these at any time, including after their 18th birthday. Children can access TANF. Some states require children to access TANF prior to refugee cash assistance. It really, again, depends on each state. But food stamps or SNAP program, Medicaid or other health insurance, higher education, including FAFSA, housing when applicable, and some other benefits, including the unaccompanied refugee minors federal foster care program. Typically, state foster care would be the primary option for national children experiencing placement disruptions with their family, but in some circumstances, federal foster care may be beneficial, and we're also able to kind of talk through those options if needed.
Can I jump
Yes,
in?
Leslie, please go ahead.
One slide. I just want
Yeah.
to weigh in and say housing could be really important and interesting, because if a child gets one of these letters, they might be living with a family or have moved in, they might have an option of moving in someplace where the family is already in public or assisted housing. And if they are, and the child joins that family, the amount of subsidy the family gets can go up. Or they might join a family that, so that you just need to know, this is formal public and assisted housing we're talking about. They already have access, as do all immigrants, without regard to immigration status, to shelter and transitional housing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So part of what we acknowledge is that receiving an eligibility letter, although we do provide translations, it can be difficult to access benefits and services with that letter. And so Aspire is a child-friendly, trafficking-specific, comprehensive case management service provided through a network of providers nationally. The grantee for Aspire is currently the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, who also administers the Trafficking Victim Assistance Program, or TVAP, which I know we received a couple of questions in advance about the TVAP program. Aspire is now the kind of the newer iteration of what TVAP is, but for children. It's a newer program, so capacity is still being built out nationally. But we work with the Aspire grantee at USCRI closely to ensure that cases for children that are in need of assistance are provided with regional coordination. So someone that can help assist them, or the advocate working with them to connect them to resources, including helping them access those benefits, or a case manager if they don't have someone working closely with them already, to be able to help them access those benefits and other services. The unique thing about Aspire is that there's also direct cash assistance associated with the case management services. So if a child's experiencing some concerns about meeting their basic needs and the family's experiencing emergency concerns, Aspire can help in certain circumstances to provide some of those financial assistance needs. Generally, we want to ensure that any child that is in need of support gets it. And so we try to make sure that any child that is referred to our office also has the opportunity to access some kind of case management or assessment of their needs through regional coordination. We also find that, and I know we saw some questions about this as well, that children may be denied access to benefits when they go to the benefits office or to the Social Security Administration to access a non-work Social Security number as part of applying for the benefits with their eligibility letter, mostly due to, like Lauren said, we received 3,000, or we issued 3,000 we received 3,000 requests for assistance last year. That's what it was. And so the number of eligibility letters we issue is still quite low in comparison with the national numbers of children accessing benefits in state by state. And so state benefits offices, state social security offices might just not be very familiar with that letter and that process. We're doing a lot of work to improve public awareness around the letter, including coordination with Social Security Administration and benefits offices, but it can be a little tricky. And so we want to also make sure that advocates working with children that are facing those pushbacks from those offices, or that children and their families that are experiencing pushback from offices are able to get access to those benefits and services. So between Aspire and our office, we really work hard to try and make sure that we can troubleshoot those cases and make sure that if someone is receiving, having a hard time accessing those benefits, that we can help break down some of those barriers. So our office, as I mentioned, does kind of a lot in terms of coordinating closely with our grantees and with others to access these benefits. We also coordinate closely with state and local child protective services. So if a child's in child welfare custody and is in need of support, we can work closely with our grantee to help make sure they get referrals to immigration attorneys or other types of culturally and linguistically specific resources. We try to make sure that we are also collaborating with our colleagues at the Office of Refugee Resettlement. As Lauren mentioned, there are a lot of unaccompanied children that are referred to our office that might have unique needs. So we collaborate closely with them. We provide technical assistance to individuals in the field. So again, anyone who submits a case to us, but especially when there are investigations, emergency concerns, large group cases, we try to provide support in those ways. And then we also work as an office to develop resources for children. We're actually revamping the handout that goes with the eligibility letter right now to try to make it more accessible and include a QR code to link to audio to try and make sure that those that speak Indigenous languages have easier access to understanding the process. So we're always open to feedback and ideas, and please feel free to share them with our office as well. But we are definitely in the weeds trying to make things better from our end. And we're always open to staffing or talking through cases if anyone that's submitting a case has questions, isn't sure if the case might meet trafficking criteria, if they have questions about Shepherd or they're experiencing challenges. We really have a very open door policy. We encourage you to reach out to us or give us a call to try to provide that support. So as I mentioned, our office, this is the kind of demographic information about eligibility letters that we issued last year. So 73% of cases we see are labor trafficking cases and 23% are sex trafficking. Again, this was last year, but the numbers are somewhat consistent over time. Sex and labor last year was 4%. Gender, we recently saw a change where historically we had seen more referrals for male clients, and just recently saw that majority go towards female, but again, quite close. And then primarily we see referrals come from the Northern Triangle countries in Latin America, so Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Mexico, and Nicaragua are the top 5, with the primary 84% coming from the Northern Triangle. And most of the children we see referred to our office are ages 13 to 17, but also some are ages 7 to 12 or 0 to 6. And in terms of eligibility letters issued, we have issued far more cases, eligibility letters in recent years. So 2,000 in 2022, and that's the highest we've seen in the past. So we're continuing to try to get the information out there and make sure that you all have access to the information you need to submit those cases. And we really value you as partners as we move forward in this work. These are some resources, and we'll make sure that you all have access to these resources. But that concludes our section of the training. And so we wanted to make sure that we also left time to open this up for questions to all of you. And again, when I say we have an open phone and email policy for any requesters out there, please feel free to share that child number and our child trafficking email address. We're always happy to staff a case or talk through any questions.
So Elizabeth, I have a question to start off with. As a judge, and I have a case in front of me that I suspect should see you, but I don't know if they have already seen you. How can I find out if they have been issued one of these eligibility letters?
That's a great question. So you can either give us a call at that child phone number right there, or Lauren has shared her direct contact information as well. I think first step would be to give us a call or send an email to that child trafficking email address. We want to make sure that children's personal identifying information is protected. So if you send us anything, please do put it either in a password protected document or an encrypted email. But we can check our system and see if we have that case or can provide any other information that might be helpful in moving forward. And I see that Susan has her hand raised as well.
Yes, good afternoon. That was an excellent presentation and information that I wasn't aware of before this. So thank you for presenting this. I'm a retired judge now, but I presided over family juvenile cases and other kinds of family matters in New Jersey. So my question is this: should we, as judges, should we assume, always dangerous to assume, but do the Child Protective Services of each state know about you so that we can at least presume that they are aware of these services that are available for the child? And then I have a part B to that. So answer that first, and then I'll ask my next.
Okay, perfect. I would say it's better to check with us than to assume that they are aware. While we definitely try to provide as many trainings as possible and get that information out there, I think depending on each kind of state's training and internal protocols, we see variance in when cases come to our office. And so we would really rather over check and make sure that we're receiving the case than assume and under report. So if you have questions about whether the case has been received, again, feel free to send us an email or give us a call or share our contact information with child welfare so that they can submit that case to us as well. We usually recommend that the person receiving firsthand information be the one to submit the request, because they'll have the most up-to-date information and kind of be in contact with the child. But we would rather it be submitted by whoever is able and willing to provide the information in that time frame, and we can always coordinate follow-up with whoever the best contact is for the child moving forward.
I think you've touched on my second question, which was because we generally should not and do not ask, the immigration status, if you were. I guess we would have to rely upon their either legal representative or advocate to have ascertained that information so it can be presented to the court when they make their case or start talking about services and things of that sort. I'll definitely get this information, and I don't know if my state has it, does it, but it doesn't hurt to just submit it again. And I
Yeah.
think we need to have you in New Jersey at one of our judicial education trainings.
We
So,
would love to join. We're very open to doing more trainings, and we want to get this information out there. So please share the word with your colleagues. I think in general, we find that people don't know enough about our office, and that we want to make sure that that information is getting out there. So please don't hesitate to share this training, share the slides, share our contact information. And we really want to get the word out there.
thank you.
Let me just jump in here for a second. Judge Hemstreet, I'm going to ask you or any other judges on this call to answer. So if you suspect it might happen and you're not, like this might be going on, a child might be a foreign-born victim of trafficking, and you don't know for sure if they're foreign-born, but you see indicia of trafficking, like who are the range of people before your court already who you might be able to ask to look into this for you? If you know somebody in the court, if you're not going to call up and make the report yourself, which I don't think judges will likely be doing, the issue is who might you be in touch with, or what might a judge do to make sure the report gets made?
So I work with a team of in juvenile court of probation officers, and so if it's a youth that's in juvenile court, either on the criminal calendar or in dependency land, which this sometimes comes up there as well, it would be the AG's office or their attorney. I might, and I have in the past said, you know, gee, this sounds like there might be a history of abuse or exploitation. Has anybody looked into that? Has anybody looked for services? Because I sit on these types of human trafficking boards in our state as well, and in my county, I will say, if you want resources, the court is happy to direct you. And you know, the case that I mentioned earlier with the young attorney trying to help the person through the minor guardianship, and then the trying to do it so that there wasn't a deportation, I referred him to you, Leslie, because I couldn't remember the name of this office, even though we had just had that presentation. If I'm not out in juvenile court, I do have staff, right? I have an administrator that I could say, hey, this case came in front of me and I have concerns about. And quite honestly, in Washington State, I have other colleagues on the bench as well, called CPS when we've had concerns. Just to get the word out, just to make a report. What they do with it, I don't know, but I think we're all mandatory reporters if we see some sort of abuse going on. And quite frankly, in my opinion, and I'm sure this opinion is shared by everyone on the screen, trafficking is a form of abuse, whether it's labor or sexual exploitation.
Great. Judge Maven, did you have a further question? You're on mute. Okay.
I did have a clarification question as I was listening to you, you know, what you were talking about. If we know, when we may not, but if we know that a child has an eligibility letter, but doesn't seem to be getting the services that we now know they should be able to receive, it sounded like we needed to refer them or their advocate to either you and or Aspire. Was that correct?
Yeah, so if you're working with a child and you know that they have an eligibility letter already, you can either reach out to our office at that childtrafficking@acf.hhs.gov email, but I can also put in the chat the general email for the Aspire program through the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, or USCRI. If you are having any trouble connecting with them or you need any support, always feel free to loop us in. They are our grantee and we're able to communicate with them regularly. So we can always flag this case for them as high priority and important. So don't hesitate to reach out to us first. But if you're kind of sharing this information with general advocates or people looking for referrals, Aspire would be probably the first stop for a benefits or case management specific referral question. If you are submitting the case directly to our office through Shepherd prior to the child receiving an eligibility letter, we always make sure that we are coordinating with USCRI or another, we're assessing for case management needs and connecting to services on those cases. So that would be done as part of that request for assistance process as well.
And I'll just add that one of the forms of technical assistance that NewApp provides, kind of the victim advocacy world and the lawyers out there that work with immigrant victims who might be victims of trafficking and domestic violence and sexual assault and child abuse and all of that, is that we have expertise in immigrant benefits eligibility, and we have some tools that help people learn about how they can accompany and advocate and educate the benefits providers who might be wrongly turning people away or might, where people are, so we can help with that as well. But I do think making sure that through Aspire, they have a case manager that is in addition to what we might be able to train an advocate to do locally are all good things that should be happening for these child victims.
Yeah, I think any coordination or support that you're able to provide through your organization as well, Leslie, is fantastic, and absolutely utilize the support that you have, and Aspire is there to support as well.
So I have one other question. So what happens? So people are supposed to report within 24 hours, but what if they don't? What if they listen to this webinar and realize that a month ago they had a case before them that should be reported? Is that okay? What do they do? What are the consequences?
Another great question. We absolutely would love to receive those cases, even if it's been more than 24 hours. 24 hours is written into statute, and that is best practice. However, we understand for a number of reasons that might not happen, or if there are a bunch of cases that have come before you and you just weren't aware of the process, please submit those cases to us. And especially if the child is close to turning 18, even if you're trying to gather more information, even if you only submit a sentence, getting it in our system before their 18th birthday allows us that time, even after they turn 18, to continue to work on that process. So really the only deadline that's hard and firm, and we can't do anything anymore if you don't send it to us, is 11:59 p.m. local time for where they're located the night before their 18th birthday. So that's the hard and fast deadline. Any time before that, we are able to receive and process cases, and we don't have any particular consequences associated with submitting it after 24 hours.
Other judges have questions on the call? Anybody else want to weigh in? I want to make sure there's room for all of that. Questions, comments?
Just want to remind everyone, I often when I have a suspicion, right, that there's a child that's been trafficked, and I talk with my probation staff and they're on the same page, and it's more of a gut, right, because you worked with children, worked with youth that are at risk for a while, but we can't prove. But I really appreciate the fact that we don't necessarily have to prove, we don't have to do an investigation, but we can still refer them for help and for benefits. We in my county, if we have that suspicion, we'll reach out to the local organization that is a advocate for trafficking victims, and we'll ask them to come and to talk with them. And sometimes that works, but more often than not, we'll hear back from that agency that say, yeah, we feel your gut is correct, but they're not going to give us enough, right? They're not going to come out and say what we all probably know, but it's nice to be able to say to them, okay, well, I think our collective guts are telling us something, and we need to forward this on to those that might be able to provide help and benefits that can change these benefits really can change a young person's life. So I think it's important. I love what you're doing. I'm sad I didn't know about it sooner, but now that I do, you'll be hearing from me, I think.
And one of the other things I wanted to weigh in on is to explain, there's 2 points. One has to do with, we've been talking a lot about trafficking victims who are foreign born, but are, and maybe suffered trafficking in their home country, maybe suffered trafficking after they recently immigrated, maybe they were unaccompanied minors, maybe they were accompanied by a family member or somebody who wasn't a parent. I mean, there could be all of those kinds of things. But I think it's also important to understand, and I just want to give a shout out to another webinar that we've recorded that we'll share with you as well. There's also trafficking occurring within families in the United States, so that you may see this in your protection order courts. You may see this in your family divorce and custody cases. And those are opportunities where the judge, like we talk about this a lot in all kinds of contexts, the importance of making findings, so that you might not make findings about the trafficking, but you make findings about elements of things that are happening factually in the case that actually could serve as a basis and serve as evidence. That's part of what I think, Elizabeth and Lauren, get me, you can correct me, but I'm assuming that those findings about certain things happening within families, like a kid having to work and not get paid, or things like that, those kind of findings in court orders, I'm assuming, would be useful to your investigations if the case, if later you end up you get a report about that child. What kinds of things in court orders have you seen or that you think might be useful?
Is that a question for us, Leslie, or for the judges? Okay, great. No, I was just going to say you hit the nail on the head. We absolutely do see a lot of intrafamilial trafficking happening here in the United States, especially unaccompanied children, but also those who came accompanied. And we are very much interested in kind of any information that you can provide about concerns that might be raised about that. Again, you don't need to have full details. You don't need to have an investigation or documents associated with that. It's really like you're looking at the situation, you have concerns. The narrative in Shepherd, we prefer for it to be as detailed as possible, but it really is very much just what you believe is happening based on the information you have, including just a narrative from the child's perspective. Usually it's an advocate or someone that's working alongside the child that just provides a summary of the experience as it's been reported. And so I think pointing out that that is very much happening here. We see a lot of cases that are happening here in the US. I think the biggest piece is that it doesn't necessarily have to meet the criteria for something like a T visa or an acceptance for investigation in your local community. It really can be, are those, and that's why we really want to include that action means purpose model in the beginning of the training, because are those elements being met? Does it meet the federal definition for trafficking as it's laid out in the TVPA? If so, send us the case, send us the narrative, send us what you have, because it really can make a huge difference in providing that stability and support to a child. And we're really grateful for all of you for sharing that information with your community. So I hope that answers your question, Leslie.
Yeah, and just to add, Elizabeth touched on this a little bit earlier, but we are also, Elizabeth and I specifically, we work on any complex case coordination. So in addition to the cases being processed in Shepherd, connection to benefits and services, and working with our child protection team at the child trafficking line, if you have any cases where you're feeling they're just complicated, or you're noticing in your court there's something where it just feels really messy related to a foreign national minor, you're not sure, or really any cases you're trying, having complications in coordination, maybe with law enforcement, child welfare, the attorney, whoever it may be, and you're needing some coordination support as it relates to human trafficking concerns. We are also here to support in those cases and be brought in. So I'm happy to also staff and troubleshoot those things with your team if helpful, but just wanted to flag that as well.
Great. Well, I want to thank you. We're getting close up to the end of the time. The last point I want to be sure I make so everybody's has it, is we've been talking about child trafficking victims here. There are also, particularly in your domestic violence cases, again, overlaps with adult trafficking that occurs within domestic violence relationships. And there's a big overlap with that and a big overlap with stalking. So it's important to understand that for adult victims, in order to get the kinds of benefits and services that we've been talking about today, the adults will need to file a T visa or continued presence. And so we can provide support and technical assistance to you and to the people in your community about how to make that happen, how to connect them with resources. But that's a big difference between child and adult victims, and why getting these letters that last beyond age 18 are so important. If somebody's identified as a child victim, they have a safety net that doesn't exist for others while they're in the process of filing for immigration relief. And that's really important as well. So I want to thank you all. Thank you, Judge Hemstreet, for leading this today. Thank you, Elizabeth and Lauren, for joining us, and for all of you that have attended. We hope this has answered your questions. And if you have further questions, send them to us on the listserv and we will get you answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for attending, and we really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.